Before we go any further, let me point out that this video will have some soft, minor spoilers of the very beginning of the game. Technically, these events have already been officially provided by Nintendo in an interview publicly. However, how it's depicted in the opening cutscene of the game provides a little bit more context. Now, we'll not be showing the full events of the opening of the game, so if you're just trying to avoid the bulk of the major spoilers, you can still watch this video safely. However, if you want to go in totally blind, well, there is a little bit of spoilers showing a small piece of the opening cutscene that gives us context for the timeline placement for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And that is what we're talking about today.
This all aligns with what I've read during my studies. And then this, it shows the Demon King. And a fierce battle against him. If the creature depicted here really does represent the Demon King, then... Oh. Incredible! This mural must be the Great War recorded in the royal histories. This is the Imprisoning War, and the events that led up to it. Link! This is a huge discovery!
Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and it looks like Tears of the Kingdom has the history of the Imprisoning War, which is potentially highly indicative of where this game takes place in the timeline. Now, let me say that I haven't finished the game yet. I've only just started. It came out today. There may be other details that we discover as we progress throughout playing Tears of the Kingdom that may shed a little bit more light on this situation. However, what we're seeing here, I think, is fairly compelling. But before going further, let me point out that we recently hit our goal of 25k. In celebration, we've been streaming Zelda every day this week, and starting today, that will be Tears of the Kingdom, and we'll be trying to break the game, so stay tuned for that. But now we're moving on to our next big goal, and that's going to be 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We are trying to double up on our entire account. It's going to be a tall task, but if you do enjoy my content, if you love Nintendo news and theories and talk about Zelda, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because then maybe we can carry this momentum over. So let me give you a bit of a recap on the Zelda timeline situation, just so you understand the full context here. So the timeline is split into three, and then at the very end of the timeline is Breath of the Wild, and it's not specified where it is. So when the series split into three is from Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time had gameplay where you were traveling between the past and the future. So at the end of the game, Link is sent back to his original time, leaving the future without a Link. And this was the birth of the adult timeline, the timeline without Link, and then the child timeline, the timeline with Link. But there was a third timeline that was created from this event, supposedly. And that event led to the downfall timeline, where Link didn't defeat Ganondorf at the end, but fell in battle. And it's this timeline where we see most of the classic Zelda games, a lot of the 2D Zelda games, including A Link to the Past, and the big event that links Ocarina of Time to A Link to the Past is the Imprisoning War. So basically, because in this timeline, Link fell in battle and Ganondorf succeeded, he continued his campaign of world domination. He transformed into Ganon thanks to the power of the Triforce, he turned the Sacred Realm into the Dark World, and the Knights of Hyrule and the Sages had to band together in this war to imprison Ganon. But since that point, there have been so many events having to do with Ganon where he is resurrected or come back in some way, where he has terrorized the different games in the Downfall timeline. So with this in mind, when they say that the Imprisoning War is a historical event in the world of Tears of the Kingdom, by extension that also means Breath of the Wild, and I think many may think, oh, so this means that these games take place in the Downfall timeline. It's finally been answered. While Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom may take place late into the timeline, it's late into the Downfall timeline, and not the others. And this makes some sense because this might explain why Nintendo and the Zelda team didn't reveal the timeline for Breath of the Wild, because it would have been a spoiler for Tears of the Kingdom. That could be the case, and this may be what we were looking at, but also keep in mind, I haven't finished the game. There may be other details that might throw things off a bit here. And it also should be considered that even in the case of Breath of the Wild, it was very hard to try and figure out what the timeline was, because there's elements suggesting all three. There's this memory where Zelda is praying over Link or knighting him, and she mentions the era of Twilight. That's having to do with Twilight Princess, which takes place in the child timeline. But then also you see rock solids all throughout the world of Hyrule that make reference to an ancient sea, and you also see Rito and Koroks, all of which are from the Wind Waker from the adult timeline. But then for the Downfall timeline, we see Lynels, and before Breath of the Wild, we'd only seen Lynels in games from the Downfall timeline. So there's a lot of potential contradictions here, you might think. But my perspective on this has been what I like to call the eventuality theory, where basically it's not so much that the timelines merge, but it is something comparable to that, where the further down the timeline you go, there are certain things that are meant to eventually happen. So regardless of which timeline you're in, be it Downfall, Child, or Adult, the Kokiri will eventually evolve into the Koroks. Or Rito will eventually come into existence. Or Lynels may come from the mountains and wreak havoc upon Hyrule, regardless of which timeline you're in. But while there may be some truth to this idea, I think, a bigger part of me right now, and it could be recency bias, wants to say that I think Tears of the Kingdom may fall into the Downfall timeline. Now again, as evidence presents itself, my opinion may change on this. However, when you consider that the legend of the Calamity Ganon is Ganondorf abandoning a physical form after generations and eons of failing, there is that longer history which is supported by the Downfall timeline. But also in Twilight Princess and in The Wind Waker, Ganondorf is supposedly defeated for good in both of these games. So that would mean there wouldn't be a Ganondorf to follow unless he was reincarnated, but the actual original Ganondorf is supposedly dead. But with the Downfall timeline, there's this long history of resurrection and coming back, and being considered just Ganon and not just Ganondorf, because Ganondorf made that evolution to Ganon when he obtained the Triforce. And now when you consider this opening cutscene where Zelda's referring to the history of Hyrule and this big event of the Imprisoning War, because it's a historical event that is on record, I am inclined to think that maybe this game does fall into the Downfall timeline. Of course, you may go back to what I said earlier, how there is this history of the Twilight era as well, so maybe it is just the eventuality theory. But what do you guys think? Does the opening of this game mean that for sure Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom take place in the Downfall timeline? I look forward to what you have to say in the comments below. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.